right, everyone. So it is Thursday, April 24th, 2025. Hope everyone is having a wonderful week so far. And we are here for our VRLTA webinar with Danielle Verderosa with HR Allies. Danielle, do you want to go ahead and get us started?
Yes, thank you very much, Kayla. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for carving out time in your busy days to attend this workshop on preparing business I-9s in front of any government audit or government scrutiny that might be coming your way. So let me introduce myself real quickly. I'm Danielle Verderosa. I was in corporate human resources in the hospitality industry for 25 years. First at Johnson and Wales University at Chipotle Mexican Grill, and then a food service hospitality management company called Guest Services based in Fairfax, Virginia. I left my vice president of HR position to start my own company, HR Allies, and now I'm a consultant for the hospitality industry, particularly restaurant owners and operators who need some occasional HR expertise, but they don't want the expense of an attorney, but they hate doing HR themselves, or they're worried that they're doing it wrong. I have been an I-9, Form I-9 compliance nerd for more than 20 years, and I'm kind of having my moment in the sun right now because in the last 3 months, suddenly this has become my most frequently asked question by clients and prospective clients who've never given I-9s much thought before. So today we're going to talk about what the Form I-9 is, and more importantly, what it represents in the new presidential administration's priorities, what kind of government actions there are against well-meaning, honest hospitality operators like yourselves, what the financial costs are of making honest mistakes on an I-9, and then we're going to talk about the right way to complete a Form I-9 so that from now on, you know you're doing it 100% by the book. And also, if there's any mistakes on I-9s you've made before, I'm going to show you how to fix them or mitigate them all on the up and up before government agents ask to see your records. And then finally, if one day you are served with a notice of inspection by the government looking to see your I-9s, I'll talk to you about exactly what to do and say so that you're protected from the risk of doing the wrong thing and getting your business possibly in trouble. I like to start off every webinar by reminding people I am not an attorney. This is not legal advice. This is not a substitute for getting legal advice from an attorney. But in my 25 plus years in HR, I've gone through a lot of government audits, including a couple of I-9 audits in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So I thought I'd like to help you all through this. First, what are I-9s? Because I don't want to presume that everybody knows. I-9s are that form that has been federally mandated since 1986 that verifies the identity and the employment eligibility of every single person hired in the United States. It is a form that's required for all U.S. hires, whether they're citizens or non-citizens, or student visas, whatever their status. The only people that don't need to have an I-9 filled out when they're hired are independent contractors and anybody hired before 1986, if you still have any of those. And the law says that not only do employers have to have an I-9 form for each hire, but they have to retain those forms for a minimum of 3 years or 1 year after they are terminated. So we'll talk a little bit about that more. Now, who is Immigration and Customs Enforcement? We call them ICE. ICE is the government agency that enforces the employment eligibility laws. ICE was only created in 2003 as part of the Homeland Security Act. And its mission is to protect the U.S. from cross-border crime and illegal immigration that threaten national security and public safety. And the tie-in is that illegal immigration can be rooted out by looking at the Form I-9s to make sure that people are who they say they are and are here legally. ICE doesn't just do border patrol and deportations, though. They do, that's the sexy part that we see on the news, but they also inspect and assess compliance with Form I-9, making sure the forms are complete, correct, and retained the way the law says they're supposed to be. The spotlight on Form I-9s and employing employees illegally in the United States has gotten tremendous attention since President Trump took office in January of this year. You may have seen this press release. You may have seen they have commercials on TV. It's something that they're bragging about, of course, rooting out illegal non-citizens who aren't supposed to be in the state, but not as sexy as the raids and arrests, not as sensational and newsworthy, but even more effective than arrests are ICE audits of the Form I-9s. And the reason is those audits take a lot fewer resources, there's less coordination than raids, but they still have potential to yield lots of illegal workers if they are working at one location or not. So that's why notice of inspections of your I-9s is not as sensational, but a very big threat for us. The audits have risen. The latest statistics we have is that ICE audits of the I-9s have risen 375% since 2017. We only know what Trump did in his first administration when he set the goal of conducting 12 to 15,000 audits a year, which was up from just 3,000 or so under the previous administrations. We don't know how much he's increased the ICE audits of I-9s yet in his second administration, but we can guess that because it's aligned with his second administration's priorities, he's going to be targeting the ICE audits of I-9s even more than his first administration. And the focus on document integrity, that's just a fancy way of saying that the form is filled out correctly. And he is targeting employers who don't use the E-Verify system, which is a government-run computer way of doing Form I-9s. And he's targeting industries with heavy Hispanic populations like the restaurant industry, trades, and construction. If you happen to be working for a company that uses the federal E-Verify system to complete your I-9s, this workshop is not going to be as helpful for you because there's a very little chance that you'll be audited by the administration. But if you are still doing the old-fashioned pen and paper I-9s, that is a red flag for the government to target you. And this is how expensive it is. We might consider this nitpicky, but ICE audits look at every single pen stroke on an I-9 and they assess fines for every single error, each single one. The violations right now range from $281 for a tiny mistake up to $2,500 per error for a more serious one. And those rates are going to go up every year. There's a federal law that says these get adjusted annually for inflation. Not that any of us on the call are doing this, but we know there are some shady characters out there in our industry who may knowingly be hiring unauthorized workers. They risk $28,000 plus per unauthorized worker that they've hired knowingly, and even prison time if they have done it more than once. So it can get very expensive if you start adding up even $281 per error times a handful of errors on each I-9. The good news, though, and why I hope today is worth your time, is that the total fines that get assessed are kind of negotiable in a way. They depend on if you've ever had violations of your I-9s before. They depend on have you made good faith efforts to try to do the right thing? And they depend on the severity of the mistakes. So today is all going to all be about how to make good faith efforts to mitigate any kind of errors that you may be found with. All right, before we talk about how to correctly fill out the I-9, are there any questions so far about what is the I-9 or why does President Trump care? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the correct way to fill out the I-9 going forward. And then later we'll talk about how to fix ones that might have been done incorrectly before. So here's the I-9 that you probably recognize. And I want to point out one thing first, the expiration date that's in the upper right corner of the I-9. ICE rolled out a new I-9 and new rules in August of 2023. So everybody hired since August of 2023 had to use this new form. And you can tell if you're using the correct form because the expiration date will say 2026 or 2027 on it. I know a lot of times we just keep using the same form over and over and over again as years go by, but this form changed in August 2023. So when you do your I-9s, make sure that the form is not expired. And anyone hiring that was hired after August of 2023 will have to have this new form filled out. By the way, just to further emphasize how serious President Trump is about I-9's importance, just 2 weeks ago, they actually issued a new I-9 form that had one little change on it. They changed the word I am a non-citizen authorized to work in the United States to I am an alien authorized to work in the United States. And semantics count, right? That's the only change they made on republishing this form. You don't have to use the new form that came out just a couple weeks ago, but you have to use a form that hasn't expired yet. So once you make sure you're looking at an unexpired form, you're going to look at section 1 at the top. Section 1 is completed by the employee that you've hired. It has to be completed on or before his first day of work. And this is where the employee attests under penalty of perjury of who he is and that he has authorization to work in the United States. Every single field on section 1 is required to be filled out, except where it says if any, like other last names used, if any, apartment number, if any. And for some reason they don't have to fill out the social security number if they don't want to. But everything else has to be completed. If the employee gives this back to you and there's some missing information in any of these fields, don't accept it if it's missing information. Specifically, you know what I've seen a bunch is employees not check off one of those boxes in the middle of section 1 where it says check off the following to attest to your citizenship or immigration status. Sometimes employees in our industry think, well, if I don't check off anything, then I'm not really lying about my lack of work authorization. So don't accept it if that checkbox isn't checked or if anything's missing. Your job here just is to ensure that they have completed all required forms, that they've signed and they've dated it, and also check to see if they said that their work authorization has an expiration date, because if it does, you'll want to make a note of that so you can make sure that they aren't working past an expiration date of their green card or whatever they have that allows them to work here temporarily. So that's section 1. It seems simple, but here are the parts of Section 1 that get botched all the time. And as silly as it might seem, ICE considers these errors. The first one, I put a star next to it, is the reminder, the warning that employees have to fill this out and sign it no later than their first day of work. If they fill it out after their first day of work, it's late and it's an error that's chargeable to you. And ICE will ask for your payroll records when they audit you, so they will see what an employee's first day of work is and compare it to the day that they filled out their I-9. And then for some reason, this happens a lot. Employees will sometimes put today's date where it asks them for their date of birth, or they'll put their date of birth at the bottom where it asks them for today's date. So when the employee hands out the form and you look to see if everything's completed, really look at it to see like you were grading a test and make sure that everything is not just filled out, but correct. Now, here's section 2 on the I-9, which is what we, the employer, has to fill out, not the employee. This is the part where the employees bring to us original, acceptable, unexpired documentation that proves, one, their identity, that they are who they say they are on their documents, and two, that they have authorization to work in the United States. And it's our job to look at this documentation that they give us. Here's a list of the acceptable documents. And again, I'm pointing out August 2023 date at the bottom because the list changed of what was acceptable on then. List A, these are the things that are in one document. They show both identity and employment authorization. Like those of us with a US passport has our identity and it shows that we are US citizens. A permanent resident card, same thing, shows identity and authorization to work in the United States. But if somebody doesn't have that, then they have to show us a document from List B, any document from List B, and any document from List C. List B proves their identity. List C proves that they're authorized to work in the US. Sometimes employees are tempted to give you like a bunch of documents. Here's my passport. Here's my birth certificate. Here's my driver's license. Here's my social security card. It, you don't get extra credit for filling out a whole bunch of things. In fact, it's the opposite. The more you fill out, the more scrutiny you're under. So for I-9s, only list one document from List A or one from B and one from C, not a whole slew of them. And this section is easier to make mistakes on than the first section, and it's all on us, the employer. First, I put a star next to it at the top. See that this section has to be filled out no later than 3 days after the employee starts. Sometimes we tell employees, hey, bring us your documentation on day 1. They forget it. Bring it on day 2. They forget it. Bring it on day 3. If they've forgotten it on day 3, the best thing to do is to let them go and then rehire them when they can produce some documentation because it has to be filled out no later than 3 days after their hire date. ICE will check that, and it's a big deal to them to make sure that it's 3 days after they've hired. So if the employee keeps forgetting it, don't give them unlimited time to bring in proof that they are eligible to work here. Then here's the part that is on you. It's to look at the original documentation that you're presented, not photocopies of anything, not letters from attorneys promising that one day there will be soon some sort of documentation. It's got to be original, unexpired, you hold in your hand and see with your own eyes. And ICE says we don't expect you to be document experts, but you have to look at each document, and if it reasonably appears to be genuine, you can accept it. So You get these, you physically examine the document, look at the face on the picture ID to make sure it is the face of the person that you've just hired. Make sure that the picture doesn't look silly, like it's a non-formal casual picture that they've put onto somebody else's ID. Make sure that the font on things like Social Security cards are are formal looking fonts and they are straight, not crooked. Those are usually telltale signs that the ID is fake. If it's fake and you accept it, then that's on. If it looks fake, I should say, if it looks obviously fake and you accept it, then that's on you for knowingly hiring an illegal person. If it looks good, then ICE gives you a pass because you did your very best. All right, so you're going to look at that documentation and then you're going to fill out exactly the numbers on the documents of list A or list B and C and sign and date at the bottom.
Real quick, Danielle, before we
Yeah,
move on from the form specifically, we did have a question in the chat. I just want to make sure we didn't get too far off.
great.
Jenny said, E-Verify allows you to mark email not provided on the section 1 of the I-9 form. And you started kind of the presentation of that saying that everything must be filled in, including the email. So Jenny just wanted to confirm as far
Thank
as
you very
E-Verify
much.
goes.
That's exactly right. E-Verify does have a different rule. You don't have to do an email address, but you do have to do a social security number with E-Verify. With the old paper, the paper and pen I-9s, you do need an email address, but you don't need the social security number. So good point, Jenny. Thank you. Um, I just have one more point about the doing the I-9s correctly. One of my most frequently asked questions is, should I make a copy and keep a copy of the identification documents? And it's a very good question. Believe it or not, it's not required that you do. It's required that you look at the originals, but it's not required that you make and keep a copy of them. There's pros and cons of it. If you keep a copy, ICE is going to view the copies too. If the copy you made is obviously fake documents or not a picture of the employee, you are on the hook for knowingly employing someone who wasn't eligible. But if everything looks legitimate to you, I recommend you making a copy because if it looks valid, it'll be clear that you did everything that was required for you to do in examining the documents. All right. Any questions about how to fill out an I-9 correctly before we talk about how to fix the old ones? Okay. Oops. All right. So self-audits are the greatest tool you have in mitigating or eliminating any risk of fines for if your records get audited. They do not shield you completely from liability, but they show good faith, which goes a long way in proving that you really are taking this to heart and you want to do the right thing. If you choose to do a self audit, and I'm going to show you how, don't discriminate by doing only your non-citizens I-9s. Audit everybody's I-9s. And it's a good idea just to let everyone know in writing that you're going to be looking at everyone's I-9s so that nobody feels like they're being singled out and discriminated against. Discrimination is still illegal right now. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you do an I-9 audit of yourself is to see a list of everybody whose I-9s you're supposed to have on file. This is a little tricky because you have to have your current employees' I-9s on file, but also you have to retain the I-9 forms for everybody for at least 3 years, even if they no longer work for you, and at least 1 year after they left you, whichever date is later. So whatever records keeping system you use, whether it's Excel, whether it's something fancier like ADP or Gusto or Toast or Paylocity, I would pull a list of all your employees with their names, date of hire, date of termination, pull it into a spreadsheet, and then delete anybody who falls outside of this range. If you're no longer required to keep their I-9 because it's been more than a year since they've terminated, or it's been more than 3 years since they were ever hired, shred it, destroy it. It can only lead to extra scrutiny and fines if ICE finds it and there are mistakes on it. So if you don't have to retain it, that means you don't have to give it up to ICE in an inspection, and you don't want them looking at stuff they don't need to, they don't have an obligation to look at. So you get the list of all your employees and then match up the I-9s you have to the names on the roster. And I bet you anything, the biggest problem you're going to have is that you're missing some I-9s. That happens all the time. So on the spreadsheet, you're going to make a little checklist in each column with the errors that you find on the I-9s that you look at them. Who are you missing? Who are you missing signatures from? Who are you missing document numbers from? Who has expired documents? Who has incorrect dates? Make whatever mistake is on the I-9, put that on your spreadsheet. And then these errors are classified by ICE as either technical or substantive. Technical errors are minor, like like the employee who put his last name where the first name is supposed to go and the first name where the last name is supposed to go, or an employee who didn't put his street address, he just put his city or state. These are oversights. They have nothing to do with whether the person is legally authorized to work here. They're technical errors and they can be corrected easily. Substantive errors, though, are when, in ICE's opinion, the employer just did not care enough about the employment eligibility laws to bother doing a meticulous job in verifying the employee's ID and authorization. These serious errors, these substantive errors, are, they say, they fail to fulfill the primary purpose of the Form I-9, which is just to verify a new hire's authorization to work. So if an I-9 is missing, if there's no documentation numbers filled out in Section 2, if you've allowed an employee to not check the box attesting that he's a citizen or a non-citizen, those are substantive errors and a much bigger deal um, to ICE. Technical errors, the easy ones can be corrected very easily, but it's critical that you don't try to forge a correction and make it look like it was done correctly in real time. You are probably going to be using a different ink pen, and anything that looks fraudulent to ICE is going to set off way worse red flags than if you come clean about, I made a mistake and I fixed the mistake. So when you see a technical error, like the employee wrote in his name wrong or left out a date, just cross it off neatly, put the correct information in above it, and then date and initial the correction. Substantive errors, though, are probably going to result in a fine because you're being punished for being lackadaisical in verifying the employee status in the first place. But you can mitigate those fines if you start from scratch and do the whole I-9 correctly over again. This shows good faith that you want to do the right thing as soon as it came to your attention that you had made a mistake. So if you look at employees I-9 and it's pretty botched, which happens all the time, get a new I-9, staple it to the original so that there's a record that you did do one at the time the employee was hired, but you wanted to redo it correctly. And then start from scratch on that new I-9, just the same way we went over the procedures. In addition to that, correcting your technical errors, redoing it for substantive errors. Either way, you're going to also want to attach what's called a mitigation statement. This mitigation statement establishes for the record, in case there's an audit, that you cared so much about doing the right thing that you voluntarily audited and corrected your own records before the government told you to do it. These mitigation statements are like a mea culpa. We made a mistake. As soon as we found out, we fixed it, and this is what we did. It doesn't need to be fancy. It just needs to explain what was corrected. And here's an example for one if you have an employee whose I-9 was missing. You can't go back and backdate to his date of hire. That would be hugely illegal. But you can say in your mitigation statement, I found we did not obtain one when he was hired. As soon as we found it, we had him complete the Form I-9. We looked at his documents. Everything appears to be valid. If it's somebody that just a simple technical error, you could say during this audit, I found that this employee didn't write her first name in section 1. She added this information as a result of our self-audit. So simple little statement that explains that you fixed it before you were required, before somebody told you to fix it. If your employee no longer works for you, you've retained their I-9, you see it's a mistake, but the employee's gone, it's too late to fix it. So it's too late. You'll still want to put a mitigation statement attached to either the I-9, or if there is no I-9, the mitigation statement becomes your record. And you'll just say that this employee is no longer employed, so we are unable to ask her to make these corrections. And that statement will at least show that you're aware you made a mistake. Any question about corrections? Okay. If ICE shows up, or if they want to audit your records, you will get what's called a notice of inspection that's either hand delivered by an agent in person, or a FedEx or certified mail. You have 3 days to respond. So don't worry that they're going to show up and immediately insist on seeing your records like it was a search warrant. Don't fall into the trap of, I have nothing to hide, so come on in, because chances are, even if you've done a self-audit, even if you think everything's in best shape possible, chances are there is something they're going to find wrong. So don't just let them come in when you're first served with the notice of inspection. Take your full 3 days that you're allowed to respond. My specialty is human resources compliance with employment laws. So I often compete with employment attorneys as a less expensive alternative for restaurant owners, but there are some times where even I say you need an attorney for this. And if you suspect that your I-9s are sketchy, or God forbid, you suspect that you might have some employees working illegally, you will want an attorney to handle this for you for sure. If you've gone through the self-audit, though, and you think your records are as good as they're going to be, use that 3-day period to just double check again that you're happy with the state of your I-9s. Separate them out from the rest of the personnel files if you haven't done that already, so that when you hand over your I-9s to the ICE agents, they're only looking at the I-9s, which is all they have the right to look at, and they're not looking at payroll records or other employee data that's mixed into a personnel file. When they come on site to look at your records, don't leave them alone. Have a manager with them at all times. Don't, as hospitable as we are, don't let them be in the dining room because it's a slow period of service and they ask for space. Don't give them an office space so they can do this. If they're hanging out, they are looking around at your employees to see if anybody looks suspicious. And they're also making your employees really nervous too. And that's not That's not nice. So don't give them space there at your restaurant or more time than they need to just get the records and leave. And I know your instinct is to be polite and hospitable, and you want to be polite and hospitable and respectful, but you need to be firm and say, I'm sorry, my attorney said I can only give you the I-9s. My attorney said I can only, I can't have you view them in the restaurant. My attorney said I need to get a receipt for anything that you're taking off site. All right, that is the end of my presentation. Before I take any questions, I want to thank you very much for your precious time. I've got two things to offer you if you'd like. One of them is a self-assessment I developed to help you gauge how high your risk is of actually being audited by ICE. You can find that on my website, hrallies.com/I9. And the second is an offer for a free 20-minute consultation on any HR topic. It doesn't have to be I-9s. So if there's any HR question that's been bothering you, I'd love to talk with you about it. And you can schedule something directly through this QR code. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very, very much.
I believe we do already have one question in the chat that was from just a little bit ago from Faith. She asked, can you pick and choose when to make copies of the IDs? I thought you did it for some. If you did it for some, you need to do it for all. So I think she's discussing when they have the documentation they provide for the I-9 forms.
Faith, you're absolutely right. If you have to do it for everybody or for nobody, because the worst thing you could do is only do it for Hispanics, and then you're discriminating against them by keeping extra records on them that you're not keeping for everybody else. So make a determination what's best for your business. If you have nothing to hide with the IDs that you're accepting, make copies for everybody. If you, gosh forbid, only make copies of the US citizens and not the non citizens, that'll look like you're covering something up.